Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Hi everyone, and welcome to Room by Room, the Home Organisation Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Yastra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Parenting a child with ADHD can be a challenging journey. One of the most common struggles faced by ADHD families is the constant battle against clutter. The hyperactivity, impulsivity, and executive dysfunction associated with ADHD can often lead to disorganization and a cluttered living space in adults, let alone kids. So in this episode, we are joined by certified ADHD and executive function coach, Liz Welshman, to explore these unique challenges, the root causes of clutter in ADHD families, and how to implement effective organization systems, and so much more. So welcome to the show, Liz. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Marie. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have you here with us today as well, because I feel like I could take some cues from what we learn today. But before we begin, do tell us a bit about what you do as an ADHD and executive function coach.
Sure. So I work these days mostly with adults and also parents, but still kids as well, mostly teenagers, but sometimes younger kids. And I help them learn about their brains and their challenges, but also their strengths, and help them develop some workarounds to make life a little bit easier with ADHD.
Yeah. And in your expertise, what are the biggest misconceptions about ADHD?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that ADHD is something that you grow out of. So ADHD is for life. It's not just when you're a hyperactive little boy at school or a hyperactive little girl. It stays with people throughout the lifespan. And in fact, ADHD can also become more noticeable and cause more problems as people get further on in their life and the demands on their life become more complicated.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of cases where people aren't diagnosed earlier on in childhood, especially with my female friends, and they only notice that these symptoms are particularly destructive to their day-to-day life later on in adulthood. So I'd love to go further into detail with what that means for children and parents in homes. But before that, let's get to know you a little bit better. This is Have You Met Liz? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Whew. Well, I don't unfortunately have a lot of spare time at the moment because I've got two kids and they're both teenagers, I always thought that when kids got older that I'd have heaps more time, but it doesn't seem to be like that. So what I love doing, I'm really into horses and dogs. So that takes up a lot of my time. And I also really like my job. So I spent a lot of time reading about ADHD and other personal development stuff, which actually sounds really boring. I also really like just bludging around and watching TV, a big TV-ophile. And when I'm happiest in my life is when I've got a TV series that I'm really into. And once that finishes, I'm a bit sad.
I totally understand what you mean. That's the dream, to have a TV show that you're fixated on. And if they have several seasons with like long episodes, like 40-minute episodes, that's the dream. I always
Totally.
feel so lost afterwards.
I know. I hate getting into something and on the first season, it's always better to arrive late. Like if you haven't watched The Sopranos yet, you're in for a treat.
Oh, I haven't watched The Sopranos yet. I've watched maybe an episode here or there for university, but that's pretty much it. And that's something that's always been on my watch list. So yeah, definitely something that I would visit at some point. But what are some of the TV shows that you fixated on that do you get really passionate about them too?
Oh, I do. Well, I loved like everybody else, I loved Succession because, it had it all. Voyeuristic, perving on rich people, and plus they were all despicable and the writing was brilliant. What else? I loved Ozark, a bit dark. Yeah.
Okay. I've never watched any of those. So
Oh,
yeah, I
gosh.
definitely have to check them out at some point because I think the TV shows that I usually tend to go for are like lighthearted. I can kind of kick back and relax, not too much suspense or darkness that will stress me out too much. I love revisiting Gilmore Girls because there's like 6 or 7 seasons and they're like 40-minute episodes.
So good. So good.
Good.
I
Yeah.
also watched Young Sheldon with my daughter about 57 times. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. But, when you watch something dark, it does make you feel like quite good about your own boring life. Well,
Yeah.
speaking for myself.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes when I get really like super into a dark TV series, I get back into daily life and I go like, whoa, the sun is out and why
Yeah.
is it bright?
Yes. And there's not a drug cartel like coming to kill me. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned that you don't have a lot of spare time now because you have 2 kids who have now become teenagers. What are some things that you enjoy doing with them? Any favorite activities to do with them?
Yeah. Well, I pretty much I figured out that the way to get your kids to want to spend time with you is to just try to get into whatever they're interested in and then hold the purse strings for that hobby. So my son is obsessed with fishing. I don't love fishing. It's smelly and messy and you have to get up really early in the morning. But I love watching him enjoy it. And he's got, the full whammy of ADHD, the full old school 1980s type. So to watch him stand on the dock from 4 a.m. For hours and hours and just be so relaxed and happy and excited, I get a thrill out of seeing that. And
Yeah.
my daughter's horse mad, so that's what I do with her.
Yeah. You see, this is why I find people with ADHD so impressive sometimes because if you really want to do something, you can do it for a whole day.
Yes. You've got to be interested. If you're interested, you're unstoppable.
Yeah. Yeah. And the feeling is like nothing else.
Totally. Like once you've figured out the itch you want to scratch, best feeling.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing some of that with us. It's been such a pleasure to learn a bit more about your day-to-day life. But before we end off this section, I wanted to ask you how you would define home organization.
Yeah, that is such a good question because I grew up watching those beautiful home organization reality shows where someone would come in and buy all these gorgeous containers and zhuzh up your house and it would be perfect by the end of it. And I always longed for that kind of aesthetic when it came to home organization. So I think that's what I used to think home organization is. Now I know from my own screw ups and from working with other people that home organization is really just setting up your home in a way so that it's functional, right? So that you can find things, so that Maybe they prompt you to take certain actions, but also so that your home is a space that you want to be in at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like organization systems at home is very much like fitted to the person living in it. It has to work for the person living in it. It may be pretty, but if it's not right for the person using it, then it's not going to work.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
And that's where so many of the difficulties come up within families because one person in the house might really value and be able to live in a space that where everything's hidden away and the bench tops are clear and it looks schmick. But that might not work for someone else, perhaps someone who has ADHD that needs things more visual. And that's where a lot of the fights can come up.
Yeah, that's actually something that I experienced recently with my partner because we just moved in together and he prefers everything hidden away while I need a lot of things right there in my face so I don't forget it. But let's get further into detail with that later on. I feel like that will tie in really nicely with what we're talking about today. So let's start out with learning a bit more about what ADHD is. What can you tell us to people who aren't really aware of what it is? Could you give some sort of explanation that will make sense?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll try to explain it in a way that makes sense. So, um, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is not a great name for ADHD. It's the name we've got, but it doesn't really represent what the experience of ADHD is. So, ADHD is not a deficit of attention. It's people with ADHD have just as much capacity for attention as their neurotypical buddies, but it's a difficulty in regulating the attention. So that means that something being important or something that's going to benefit us in the long run, that is not necessarily juicy enough to captivate our attention. And really, to be functional in life, you have to be able to have agency over where your attention goes. And you have to be able to point your attention to what's important. And you also have to shift it. And you also have to be able to pull yourself out of something when it's really, really engaging, but it's not exactly where your attention should be right now.
Yeah, that's a really apt way of putting it. And how would you describe ADHD's place in the home? How does having ADHD result in having a cluttered home at times?
There are a number of ways that ADHD can contribute to a cluttered home. First of all, people with ADHD are more externally focused. So, what do I mean by that? Our attention is going to be grabbed by things that are outside of us. So, that means that, say, I walk through the door and I know that my keys have to go in a certain space, but my attention's captivated by something that's not nowhere near where I need to be putting my keys. I'm more likely to just dump the keys wherever I left them. And I'm not thinking about the next time I go to find my keys. It also affects memory. So we're less likely to remember where we put things. And also, ADHD shortens our time horizon. So the amount of time into the future that we can touch and feel. So part of maintaining an organizational system or limiting clutter is that you kind of need to care about future you, but when you have ADHD, you're not able to really connect with that in the same way that you would if you didn't have ADHD. So you're more likely to leave things lying around.
Yeah. And what are the specific executive functions that are usually impacted by ADHD?
those are the brain processes that stop us just from acting on impulse all the time and actually directing our actions. So one of the executive functions that would impact organization is just that own self-directed talk. So that inner voice where you're saying, okay, if I need to think about this thing now, if I need to create this outcome later, then I need to perform this action now. That voice is not very loud in people with ADHD. We also have problems with nonverbal and verbal working memory. And nonverbal working memory is that ability to create a picture in your mind. So let's say you're in one room of the house and you're thinking about something that you need in the other room of the house. People with ADHD are not as able to create a mental image of that. We're also not as able to, let's say, we know if you tell a kid, go clean your room, they're not naturally able to create an image in their mind of what a clean room looks like. So they don't really have that IKEA instruction manual of how to recreate that, of what that done picture of a clean room would look like. So that makes it really hard for them to start working towards it.
Because the image is so abstract and they're thinking like, okay, so now I have not only got to clean my room, but I've also got to think about how to clean my room. And usually they're like 10 steps in order to get your room clean. And you still have to think about how to do each step.
Totally. And then, before we think that the thing that's getting in the way is you can't be bothered to get off the couch and do it, right? But that's actually the last bit. The last bit. The final executive function required to actually get up and start cleaning the room is getting up off the couch, is that task initiation. But we ignore all the bits that come before.
Yeah, so I see how it's easy for an outsider or someone who doesn't have ADHD to look at that and go, yeah, that's just laziness, when in actuality, it's more of just overwhelming because there's so many steps for someone with ADHD as opposed to someone without ADHD. So what are some examples of the extent to which clutter can accumulate when this type of task initiation is left undone?
Yeah. Well, if I think about my own home and the things that clients come to me about, the classic examples are the bedroom, right? You've got the piles of clothes on the chair in the corner. You know those clothes where you're like, they're not dirty, they don't need to be washed, but they're not in the wardrobe clean, right? Those having to put them away or make decisions about what you do with those. The things that we need to get out the door every day, right? So the keys, the laptop, the chargers, all of that stuff, that's often strewn across the house. It goes from room to room. So that makes it hard to get out the door in the morning. And I will also say that the challenges that people with ADHD have with clutter, they're kind of everybody challenges, right? They tend to just be exacerbated. So most people will have that drawer in the kitchen that's like the everything junk drawer that you can barely even open or close anymore.
I have 3 of those drawers.
Yes, I know. But I've got one in every room. Like, just I don't know where this. I don't know what category this. One of my clients.
Yeah, I can't figure it out right now.
Totally. One of my clients calls it the miscellaneous category, and I often find that the miscellaneous category grows and grows and grows. The other really common space where we tend to see clutter is transition spaces. So like the car is a transition space. So getting from one area of your world to another area of your world. People's like, I know that I have a tendency to live in my car, but that tends to be a space that gets really cluttered and really overwhelming. The area around the front door or around the garage door, wherever people are walking in and you're exhausted at the end of the day and you dump all your stuff, that tends to be a real area for clutter as well.
Yeah. And when it comes to families with ADHD, what unique challenges do they experience from having multiple people in the family or more than one person in the family have ADHD and have that clutter built up?
That's such a great question. And I think that I'd add a little bit of context around that as well, because we know that ADHD has a very strong genetic component. Now that more adults are getting diagnosed with ADHD, often the way they find out about their own ADHD is their child has been diagnosed with ADHD and they learn a bit more about ADHD and it's all sounding a little bit familiar. So it's very common, first of all, for at least one of the parents in the home to have ADHD. And if you grew up in the 80s or the 90s, like I did, it's highly likely that if you have ADHD, that you might have been missed, especially if you're a woman. So that's and also it might be that more than one sibling in the home has ADHD. So that causes a lot of problems. For me, I didn't mention that I also have ADHD, so that would probably be good information. So I had my first child when I was 26 and I had no idea about ADHD. I think if I'd heard about it, I'd just heard about it in the context of bad parents not being able to control their children, so they drugged them. Like, honestly, that just blows my mind that I used to think like that, but that was my concept of ADHD. And once I had a baby, and especially as my kids got older, and we know that routine is so important for all children, I realized I don't have any routines, or I thought I didn't have any routines. I'm responsible for establishing these routines. And so as the person who was meant to be the leader of the household, that was not a skill set that I had, establishing routines and being organized and keeping a home clutter-free. So that was very difficult for me, not only to establish for my home, but to model for my children as something that was important and something that was valuable. Also, my husband is very organized. He's very neat and he really values it. And when he sees me get messy, especially when he can see that when I'm interested in something, I can really put my mind to it. I can really apply myself. He takes that really personally as me not caring about something that's important to him. And he brings his own value set in and his way of doing things. And I mean, I just didn't super value being neat and tidy. I was like, well, I've been all right without being neat and tidy. So there's that real values conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It sounds like there's so many complex issues going on here and there. Looking back, would you advise that expectant parents learn to establish their own routines and figure that out before having children?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And in theory, yes, that would be great. But I'm careful to say that because I do have clients who haven't had children who say to me, well, I can't look after myself. How on earth am I going to care for anyone else? And feeling like almost that uh, mastering organization should be a prerequisite before having children. But sometimes we learn things by necessity, and it's if you don't have to, like if living with a bit of clutter and a bit of what someone else would view as disorganization, if it's not a problem for you yet, it's not a problem. And I think that having an awareness of it is helpful. Like if knowing that maybe after your life gets more complex by whether that's children or work situation or caring for elderly parents, whatever it might be, knowing that that's going to present more organizational challenges for you, that's great. But I don't think that it's realistic to develop mastery for a skill that's not yet required. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And for ADHD families who are currently having issues with clutter, what approaches do you recommend employing?
Well, it really, really depends on the situation. But a couple of places to start. First of all, what are our beliefs as a family and as individuals around how a house should work? Like how tidy it should be, how much mess and chaos we're comfortable with. Working parents don't have heaps of time, right? They don't have whole days on their weekend to set up elaborate systems. And they definitely don't have time to maintain those systems. So I think that trying to get on the same page, like if we have different beliefs around a certain level of clutter that we're comfortable with, can we meet in the middle? Where can we have a little bit of wiggle? The second thing I would say is think about how you function as a family. So the purpose of having an organized home is to help you live better, right? So again, if something's not a problem, it's not a problem. Is that pile of stuff in the corner, is that really affecting how I function in my life? Possibly not, right? But is the fact that I can never find my keys in the morning and I'm late for work or feeling stressed when I get to work every day, is that a problem? Yeah, okay, so that's something that we can work around. That's something that we can target our attention onto first. So
Yeah.
thinking about where the functional problems are in the home and targeting those very specifically first.
Yeah, I think one piece of that also is if clutter around your room or your home is making you feel bad about yourself because you leave things around, then it's pretty it sounds like it would be a pretty big issue to solve, and that also does tie in pretty well to the bit about functioning, because you need to feel good about yourself to get up on a daily basis, feel confident, go outside, feel good about what you do, you yourself as a person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would also say that by the time you're an adult with ADHD, yes, you might not have a parent who is telling you all the time how messy you are and why can't you just tidy this room, and messages around laziness. You might not be having that directed at you anymore, but you've internalized that, right?
Yeah.
So even when we know ourselves really well and we understand why we struggle, a messy space can become a trigger for a lot of those shaming thoughts that we've carried along in our shame backpack for 40 years.
Yeah, and that's not to say that messiness is morally inferior by any means, but these are kind of just the cards that we've been dealt, and this is how we react to messiness psychologically, and how we're going to get around that or manage those feelings of inferiority is to get organized.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think that, again, we have to be careful with that because, especially women, we've grown up with these implicit cultural values around what a good woman is, what a good mother is, and usually it involves some notion of being organized, having a tidy home, um, you know, all of those things, and I think that I speak to women all the time who are doing amazing things in the world, who are really successful, who have all these strengths, but yet the organization piece is like the death knell. It's like I'm not accomplished, or I don't have my life together if my home is a mess. And so I think that we need to really think about the moral attribution we give to clutter and messiness. It's not a moral failing to be messy, right? But
Yeah.
we all deserve to have homes and spaces that function for us. And actually, when we can be a little bit more neutral about messiness is just another challenge, then we're able to problem solve for it in a way that doesn't feel like so much of a reflection on our character.
Oh yeah, 100%. I feel like recently I have seen more women be comfortable with the messiness. We have been taught our whole lives that we should be clean and neat, but now that these same women have grown up and have their own places to live and they can run their own home, we're hoarding a bit more, which isn't necessarily like a great habit or anything, but it is what we do. We like to collect things. We collect things, and we it's a little bit messy around the house, and that's okay. And I feel like I'm seeing that more with my female friends of around the same age as me, which is a good thing, but we are still attaching that guilt and shame to it. So maybe the next wave would be removing or alleviating that shame, but for now we can work on how to declutter, how to keep things neat in the home. So are there any techniques that are particularly effective for people with ADHD?
Yeah. So first of all, if you find yourself, say you declutter a space and you organize it and you're finding that it gets out of control really quickly, you've probably got too much stuff in the room, right? So more stuff, like the higher the difficulty level of organization. Just having less stuff is a really great place to start. I'm a chucker. I love chucking stuff out. And I often have been hit by a wave of remorse after one of my chucking efforts, because I was like, oh, God, it'd be really good to have that thing right now. And I've thrown out, important documents and stuff before. But so don't do that. But in general, if it's constantly getting out of control, you probably have too much stuff. That's the easiest place to start. The other thing is know yourself, right? So if you are someone who that having to bend down and put papers away in an awkward drawer, that at the end of the day, you really just never, that you never do it. You know that you always leave them on a pile. Put it somewhere easy, like put things at the level that you're standing or that you're sitting. Have them easy to access and easy to put away. open shelves are a really good idea. We want things to be visual. So trying to have organization methods that eliminate steps. And again, this is where we have to give ourselves permission to make it easy, because people will be like, how hard is it to open a drawer? Well, if you're not doing it, probably pretty hard. Like, worth making it easy.
Yeah, for sure. That is actually the reason that I have all of my highest shelves in my kitchen all empty, because I can't reach that thing without getting a step stool out. And I just know there's no way I'm getting a step stool out. And it sounds like laziness, but it's just too many steps. I'm just not gonna do it.
Totally. And I used to have on my top shelf. I mean, why do they even put these stupid shelves in houses? I mean, I had on my top shelf the blender and all the smoothie paraphernalia up there, like the protein powder. And every time I would grab something from there, everything would fall on my head. Right. So, and I just sort of shove it back in, and then got to the stage where I'd open the cupboard and everything would fall on my head. Right. So that's not working for me. Labels are really, really great. I actually had another ADHD coach come into my home who is a professional organizer, and I just learnt so much from her process. But she came with her label maker, and it's just amazing how knowing, like in theory, where things go, but it just really reduces the cognitive load if the label is right there telling you this is where the potatoes go, this is where the undies go. Ideally, the potatoes and the undies aren't in the same room, but if that's you, that's fine. Now for kids, and actually this is something that works for adults as well. Remember that all kids, not just kids with ADHD, because executive function development is a developmental process, right? So it's something that we develop as we grow up. It's a bit laggier in people with ADHD, but they don't have that strong nonverbal working memory. So they're not able to create a picture in their mind. So sometimes it can be effective to go from labels to actually a photo of the thing that goes in that space, right? So, for example, if you want your kids to put their backpack, their wallet, their hat, their shoes in a certain spot, have a photo of the things that go in that space. Even better is to have a photo of them putting those things in that space, so that they connect that not only do my things go here, but I'm performing an action to put them there. That only works if anyone who's listening to this with teenagers is thinking, there's no way in hell my kid's going to let me take a photo of them doing that. So like that's for people like, if they're, you might have missed that window if they're over 8 or 10. Now, as we're thinking about strategies that work for our kids, they work for adults as well, right? So we don't really give ourselves permission as adults to use those strategies that really support kids, but they really help us too. So if you find yourself not putting things in the right spot over and over again, do the same thing. Take a photo. Take a photo of what's in that space, so that you've skipped a couple of steps in executive functioning processes to put it there, because our executive function really is something that we deplete over the course of the day. And so we want to use it up on things that matter, not trying to figure out where stuff goes.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for that method as well. I did this with my storage box, where I kept all of the occasion dresses that I had that just didn't make sense to go in my everyday wardrobe, and I just took a picture and I pasted it of like all the dresses that are in there so that I know without having to open it. And it's been such a huge help. And also when I was growing up, my mom, she would write down rules, but they didn't work for us. So, or house rules. So instead, what she did was she found icons on the internet and she just printed them out that would like, attached to like a certain rule, and immediately it was so easy to just look and go like, okay, no eating and drinking in this room.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Don't punch your brother in the face means less than like your brother with a black eye, right?
Yeah.
Your mother's a genius. I love it.
She might have gotten the idea from our occupational therapist, maybe, but yeah, that definitely would recommend. Another cleaning system that I've seen before, I've never used it because I don't think I need it, but some other people might. I've seen this circulating the internet. It's this chore charm bracelet system where each morning the user sets themselves up with like a physical reminder of their task in the form of a keychain wrist bracelet, or chore charms as they call it, and each one has a tag to remind them of a particular task like making the bed or resetting a workspace. And it's just, it could be an image, and they aren't to take them off until they complete the task, so they're like physically on your wrists, and it may be uncomfortable to go to sleep with them. So what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think that's a great idea. And there are so many great tools like apps as well that people can use to remind them essentially of workflows, right? Like this is the order that you have to do things, and here's a prompt to remind you to do it. Where we get stuck is that the person who's using it has to be invested in using it, right? So parents will often spend a lot of money and get really frustrated in setting up a system for their kids. And the kid, there's no buy-in. Like the kid doesn't care. Like they haven't chosen that system for themselves. And so then you don't get that engagement. So all of these tools are great. They work. I mean, I love that one as well because it's got a tactile element to it. So it's got everything that it needs for something to be successful. It's on your wrist. You can feel it. You can see it. It's got prompts, and you get a little reward, an instant reward just by removing a charm. But if a kid doesn't want to use it, they're not going to use it, right? No matter how much you threaten them or bribe them. So whatever strategy you use around the home or just in general, you need to have a conversation with the kids to get them to buy into that. And the best way to do that is to engage their own creativity and resourcefulness and bounce off each other to find ways that are going to work for them.
Yeah, and clutter prevention is also imperative in ensuring that a home remains clutter-free. And the concept of one in, one out has made rounds in the decluttering community. Yes, there's a community for decluttering. It's huge. How effective is this concept with ADHD homes?
Well, in theory, I guess it would be effective because you're keeping an eye on the amount of stuff. I think that mostly when people with ADHD are making purchases, they're not thinking about the clutter in their home, right? So first of all, they're probably out of the space where the clutter is. So they're not connecting to the clutter at all. Also, they're just buying something because they want it, right? They love it. They're able to justify that purchase in some way. So yes, it works in theory, but it might not match the way an ADHD brain actually works. Having said that, if someone really thought about it and enforced that rule for themselves and had some sort of prompt to remind them at the point of performance, so at the time that they're about to make a purchase, something that remind them of that rule, it could really work.
Mm-hmm.
The other challenge that really comes up for my clients is that a lot of people with ADHD have a very strong sense of justice and fairness and really care about the planet. And one of the barriers for them to throwing things out is they don't want to just add to landfill, right? Like, so what do I do with this thing? I don't want to just throw it in the bin, but to give it away, to put it in a charity bin or to repurpose it or sell it, that becomes a whole job in itself. I mean, I don't know if this is you, but it's definitely me for a long time that I'd have those big black garbage bags of clothes that are meant to go to the charity bin sitting in my car for like months and months, right? So in theory, yes, that's a great rule. And if it works to reduce how much you purchase as well, that could be really effective. But again, you have to know yourself. If you are not going to be able to get things out of your home because you feel terrible about adding to landfill, then you have to consider that as well. And right, we all should be mindful about that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like I've learned so much from you, and I really appreciate you sharing all of that with me. Now, let's talk about some practices and habits. So, what is a habit that you would recommend an ADHD parent regularly practicing in order to maintain a clutter-free home?
Mm-hmm. I think that rhythms and rituals that you follow every day are a really good place to start. Something that happens frequently enough that you almost don't have to think about it, that it becomes a rhythm of your day. Little things that you can do every day to stay on top of clutter. Something that many of my clients implement is some sort of closing ritual. So something that they do at the end of every day, that the whole family has some jobs that they do. And that could be as simple as folding up the blankets on the couch, thinking about what's on tomorrow, getting your stuff out for the next day. Could be something as simple as that. For some people, it's a full kitchen reset. I know that for me, the impact of a messy kitchen, my kitchen's the one place in the house that sort of sends a message to my brain of, do I have my act together or not? If I wake up to a messy kitchen, that's a bit of a disaster for me.
Mm-hmm.
So having some rituals that you follow, starting with the bookends of the day. So what's a workflow that we follow in the morning, an order of operations that helps us function better, but also helps manage the clutter. And then the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if everyone has had this phase at all, but when I moved out of my parents' home, we used to have closing rituals and stuff like that as well, like you mentioned. But when I moved out, I was thinking, wow, I'm free from all of this obligation. I can do anything I want. I can just go to bed and I don't have to do anything. I don't have to pack my bag. But what I learned after a few years of living like that is that I am a mess. And I wake up feeling horrible because I didn't have any ritual rhythm whatsoever. And I just lived, I thought I liked it. I liked the idea of it, but it actually made me really dysfunctional. And now I totally love the daily rituals and stuff like that. I love putting on the dishwasher because that's my signal that my day's done. I can rest as well.
Totally. And I think that so many, we all think our parents are putting things in these places just because they're trying to torture us in some way, right? They're making our life harder, and life's going to be so much better when we just have all this freedom. But I think it's just a natural cycle of adulthood that after a while you're like, oh yeah, actually, I do kind of like knowing where everything is. And
Yeah.
having some order to my life. Sorry, Mum.
Yeah, but yeah, so it sounds like it's not this challenge isn't unique to me. And I would assume I can imagine that a lot of ADHD parents would have kids who are pretty resistant to doing these rituals. So what is your advice for managing that?
Yeah, that is a great question. First of all, something that we need to understand is that ADHD causes a 3 to 5 year delay in executive function development. So when you're looking at your 13-year-old kid, you're not actually looking at a 13-year-old, even though they might have hairy armpits and they might stink and terrible language, all of that stuff, doing all those normal 13-year-old things. They don't have the organizational skills of their mates who don't have ADHD or even their older sibling. So we've got to be really mindful of meeting our kids where they're at, actually having realistic expectations for them. If they are a complete, I'm not going to swear, sorry. If they are a complete mess right now, if it's just chaos, then if you are expecting them to all of a sudden be super organized and have everything perfect all at once, you're just setting both of you up for frustration and fights and failure, right? So meet your kid, look at where is my kid actually at, not just where I think they should be at, what I think they should be able to do, and just pick one thing at a time, like one space that you can work on. And say, for example, it is the bedroom, right? Like you want them to start cleaning up their room a little bit. Start with a small aspect of that and make it really linked to an action, right? So we can't just say clean your room. Doesn't mean anything to a kid who never cleans their room. Start with at the end of every day, or as small as after you have a shower, hang your towel up in the bathroom, right? Something really small that's really clear, really explicit, and have some sort of prompt so that you're not having to nag them all the time. So that could be a photo on the wall when they come back to their room that reminds them that they need to hang their towel up, right? Something that doesn't, we have to build into these organizational systems, something that removes the parent as always having to be the prompt, because it's exhausting, right? Part of why parents get so frustrated is because we're sick of nagging all the time. We're sick of having to be the constant reminder for our kids. And our kids don't want to be nagged either. So we have to build into our systems prompts that aren't just dependent on us. So meet your kids where you're at, start small, and give them a chance to be successful, right? That even when it doesn't look like it, our kids really, really want to do well. They want us to be happy with them, and they want to feel like they have some agency in their life, like they can actually develop a skill, like they can contribute to the home in some way. So we want to give them the best chance of being successful. And that really does have a snowball effect. I think that parents of kids with ADHD know intuitively that their kids' lives are harder, right? They're getting so many more negative messages. They're struggling at school. Things are just hard. And we think that building up their self-esteem and their self-confidence is giving them compliments and affirmations and telling them how great they are. But what really builds self-esteem and self-confidence is doing stuff. It's contributing and feeling successful, having a little taste of a win. So you're really doing your kids a favor by giving them a chance to have a win.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I think it's a great place to end off. But before we do that, let's move on to the open mic section. This is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Oh my gosh, you did prompt me with this beforehand, but now I feel like, whoa, where do I even start? Passionate about so many things. Okay, so what is really getting my attention at the moment is how overwhelmed people are, right? That just about every person who comes to me or who sends me an inquiry, I think that 100% of inquiries would have the word overwhelmed in there. And we live in a world where our attention is always distracted. But we're also being told all the time to be better. Like we're told to be really focused on the future and on self-improvement and on doing more. But we're never actually fully present in the moment either, because our attention is always being grabbed by something else. So something that I'm really interested in at the moment is exploring the concept of time and how we can get better in the way, not so much that we use time in the old-fashioned bro-ish productivity sense, but how we can really build lives that we feel proud of and how we can feel like we're using our time in a way that's really aligned with our values. That was probably a bit esoteric, wasn't it? Sorry.
Quite. Yeah, using the time to do something that's fulfilling. Yeah. And is there anything that, well, I suppose, well, I was going to ask if there's anything in your life that you feel this way about, but I assume that that's, well, your main job.
As my life is getting more complex, I have parents that need a little bit more support. I've got kids who really need me. Work is really busy. I just feel like I'm constantly juggling, and one of the pervasive thoughts that I wake up with and go to bed at night is, what balls have I dropped? What have I screwed up? What have I missed? And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that so many women, especially and men, I'm sure as well, but just about all the women I speak to are feeling the same way. And I think that we've always thought about time management in a sense of how can I be more productive? But I'm starting to think more about how time management can help us set better boundaries, how we can learn to disappoint people, how we can say no to things, how we can learn to tolerate guilt of letting people down. Because I just think that most people have way more on their plate that they can than what they can manage. And most of us really, really want to do a good job and could do a good job in lots of areas, but we've just got too much going on.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there because, I mean, we've been taught since young that a normal life is working 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and having a stable marriage and family and kids and taking care of your parents. But I don't have most of that. I don't have any of that really. And I already feel like that's a lot because I have my relationships to juggle. I have my friendships that I can't let down. I mean, not that I view it as like a task or anything like that, but more of just, I have to maintain, I want to maintain the friendship, but I have so many other things to do. There's life admin and all that kind of stuff. So I think that, you know, the world should be changing with time, and I do see younger people as well starting to view time management as more of like, let's set boundaries too. So yeah, I'm hoping to that we all move in the direction as well.
Totally. And Marie, what I would say is that what you just described, it's not so much a function of like, oh, my life is harder or less hard than you because I've got more going on. But you just described wanting to do good stuff, right? Like, I want to be a good friend. I want to be a good partner. I want to do good work. If you are driven by that, if you are someone who wants to do a good job in all areas of your life, you're vulnerable to burnout, right? You're vulnerable to overworking yourself, no matter how much or how objectively not much you have on your plate, right? But it starts with us. We have to learn to tolerate that sometimes we're not going to do our best, right? Sometimes we're going to show up and phone it in a little bit. And we have to be able to tolerate not being at our best all the time.
Yeah. And I think the best place to start is definitely talking about how it's okay to make mistakes sometimes.
Absolutely. Is it? Are you sure?
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for joining us today. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Okay, you can find me on my website, lizwelshman.com. My Instagram is lizwelshman_ADHD. And I don't know what my LinkedIn is, but just look up Liz Welshman. You'll find me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll link all those in the show notes anyway. So that's totally fine. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. I had such a good time talking to you. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you learned a bit about ADHD in the home. And even if you don't have ADHD, well, chances are if you're listening to this, you probably have ADHD. But even if you think you don't or you don't have it, hopefully this will be of use to you anyway. So yeah, we'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Room by Room, produced by the Home Organisation Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at ho.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Yastra. Thanks for tuning in.